At just 20 years old, Anthony of Egypt gave away his entire fortune, vanished into the desert for decades, and became the man whose brutal battles with temptation and demons inspired monastic Christianity across the world. Anthony the Great, also called Anthony of Egypt or Anthony Abbot, is celebrated on January 17th as one of Christianity's most influential saints. He lived in Roman Egypt, and his choice of the desert reshaped Christian spirituality for centuries. Most of what we know comes from the life of Antony, written soon after his death by Athanasius of Alexandria. Because that biography spread rapidly in Greek and Latin, Anthony became a model for monks across East and West. He is called the father of monasticism, not because he was first, but because his example multiplied everywhere. His story begins in a small Egyptian village and ends near the Red Sea in severe solitude. Yet, his solitude never stayed private because people kept finding him and carrying his message outward. Anthony was born around the year 251 in Coma, also spelled Coma, near Heracleopolis Magna in Middle Egypt. He was born into a well-to-do Christian family who owned land and could provide a secure future. Ancient sources describe him as untrained in pagan literature, shaped instead by scripture and village faith. When he was still young, he listened closely to the gospel read aloud in church. Those public readings mattered because most ordinary Egyptians did not own personal manuscripts. Anthony's faith was therefore formed by hearing, repeating, and obeying what he heard. That pattern of obedience becomes the key to understanding everything he later did. When Anthony was about 20, both of his parents died, leaving him responsible for the household. He also became guardian of his younger sister, who depended on him for safety and provision. Soon after, he heard the words of Jesus about the rich man and the call to perfection. He took the command literally, selling what he had and giving to the poor around his village. He kept only what was necessary to arrange his sister's care and to begin an ascetic life. Tradition says he placed his sister among a community of Christian virgins for protection and stability. Then he stepped away from ordinary social life, choosing discipline, prayer, and poverty instead. At first, Anthony did not vanish into distant wastelands because he learned gradually and carefully. He sought out an older ascetic near his home and trained under him as a disciple. He practiced fasting, manual work, memorizing scripture, and long hours of prayer. He also learned the desert art of attention, watching thoughts and resisting impulses before they grew. This early period formed him for decades because he treated holiness as a craft requiring practice. Accounts describe him sleeping little, eating sparsely, and living with an almost military regularity. Even then, people noticed him because radical self-control is hard to hide in a village. After years of training, Anthony pushed further into solitude, away from constant interruptions. He lived for a time on the edge of the desert and later in abandoned tombs near the village. These tomb stories became famous because they symbolize his fight against fear and spiritual harassment. In the ancient imagination, tombs were places of dread, and his presence there looked like defiance. His biographer describes intense temptations, including terror, confusion, and visions meant to break him. Anthony interpreted these struggles as spiritual warfare rather than mere psychology or mood. He answered them with prayer, scripture, and stubborn endurance, refusing to negotiate with despair. Around the age of 35, he chose an even harsher withdrawal, aiming for near-total isolation. He crossed the Nile and went to a mountain area later associated with a place called Pispir. There he found an old fort, shut himself inside, and lived there for about 20 years. Food was brought to him occasionally, often thrown over a wall, because he would not receive visitors. He stayed out of sight so completely that people doubted whether he was still alive. This phase created the legend of the hidden saint, unknown to the world but known to God. Yet the very secrecy increased curiosity, and crowds eventually gathered, demanding guidance. When Anthony finally emerged, the stories say his body looked disciplined rather than destroyed. He appeared lucid, stable, and composed, as if his harsh life had clarified his mind. This is one reason he became persuasive, because he embodied what he preached. People asked him how to pray, how to fast, and how to fight temptation without collapsing. Others came for healing, because holiness and healing were closely linked in early Christian imagination. Anthony did not present himself as a miracle worker, but stories of healings and exorcisms followed him. His reputation grew because desperate people talk, and the desert carried news like wildfire. A community gradually formed around him, though it did not begin as an organized monastery. Men built small cells and shelters nearby, wanting to imitate his simplicity while remaining close to his counsel. In this way, solitude paradoxically generated community, because one man's withdrawal became a beacon. Anthony offered short sayings, practical instructions, and warnings against pride and spiritual showmanship. Later collections of Desert Fathers preserved many of these sayings, shaping monastic wisdom for centuries. He emphasized discernment, meaning the ability to recognize which thoughts lead toward God or away. That emphasis later became a central theme in Christian ascetic literature across multiple traditions. Anthony's influence was not only local, because the 4th century was a time of upheaval in the church. During periods of persecution, he is said to have gone to Alexandria to encourage imprisoned Christians. Some accounts connect this visit with the persecution under Emperor Maximinus around the year 311. He went openly expecting martyrdom, yet he was not arrested, and he returned again to the desert. This episode matters because it shows he did not reject the church's public life. He wanted solitude, but he also believed courage required standing with suffering believers when necessary. His desert was therefore not escapism, but a chosen discipline he could temporarily set aside for others. Later, another crisis shook the church, this time through doctrine rather than persecution. The Arian controversy divided bishops and communities over how to confess the divinity of Christ. Anthony, though not a trained theologian, supported the side represented by Athanasius of Alexandria. Tradition says he went to Alexandria again, this time to strengthen the faithful against Arian teaching. His presence mattered because ordinary believers trusted ascetics as living signs of sincerity and sacrifice. Athanasius, who wrote his biography, presented Anthony as a witness for Orthodox faith. In that way, the desert hermit became part of the wider church struggle for doctrinal clarity. Stories also describe correspondence between Anthony and Emperor Constantine, which shows how famous he became. Whether every detail is exact, the tradition reflects a real shift in Christian society after legalization. An emperor could now seek prayers from ascetics, and ascetics could admonish emperors to fear God. Anthony is portrayed as unimpressed by power, reminding rulers that a kingdom is temporary. This theme fit monastic ideals because monks saw worldly authority as unstable and spiritually dangerous. It also helped later Christians imagine a moral counterweight to imperial Christianity's temptations. So even legend here carries a message consistent with how monastic writers thought. As his fame continued to spread, Anthony sought greater distance to preserve silence and recollection. Athanasius describes him moving to what later tradition calls the inner mountain of the desert. This is associated with Mount Colzim, near the Red Sea, close to today's monastery of St. Anthony. He traveled for days into a harsher landscape, far from the settled Nile Valley. There he found water, a small garden space, and a place to live with fewer interruptions. Even there, disciples still came, but the effort required filtered out casual religious tourism. The inner desert became the final stage of his life and the place of his death. Anthony lived to an advanced age, commonly given as about 105 years. In late antiquity, such longevity was seen as a sign of discipline and divine favor. Near the end, he gave final instructions that reveal both humility and practical wisdom. He asked his disciples to bury him secretly so his grave would not become a cult site. He also distributed simple personal items as tokens of friendship and spiritual inheritance. Tradition says he gave a staff to Macarius of Egypt, a leading monk who carried his legacy. He also entrusted one sheepskin cloak to Athanasius and another to Serapion of Thmuis. Anthony died in the year 356, traditionally on January 17th, in the desert near the Red Sea. His disciples are often named as Macarius and Amatus, who witnessed his final days and buried him. The secret burial request was partly about humility and partly about avoiding superstition. Ironically, secrecy rarely lasts, and later traditions claim his remains were discovered and moved. One tradition says relics were taken to Alexandria, then to Constantinople, and later to France. Whether every transfer is historically firm, the veneration is historically clear and widely attested. His cult spread so powerfully that churches, monasteries, and villages across Europe took his name. Because Anthony lived before modern canonization processes, he was not beatified by a later pope. He is venerated as a saint by ancient acclaim, often described as canonized pre-congregation. That simply means his sainthood was recognized long before centralized Vatican procedures existed. His feast entered the Church's liturgical life through long-standing tradition, rather than a single formal decree. This is common for early saints, especially those from the age of persecutions and early monasticism. In other words, his sanctity is older than the paperwork that later centuries developed. His authority comes from memory, witness, and the lasting impact of his example. Anthony is remembered for miracles, but the deeper miracle in his story is spiritual formation. Still, early accounts attribute healings, deliverance from demonic oppression, and prophetic insight to him. The famous Temptations of Saint Anthony became a major theme in Christian art and literature. Painters depicted monsters and visions not to entertain but to dramatize the inner battle for purity. In medieval Europe, he also became associated with Saint Anthony's fire, a burning sickness linked to ergotism. Hospitaller orders caring for victims invoked his intercession, and his name became tied to healing. Over time, he became patron of animals and farmers, and blessings of livestock often took his name. Yet Anthony's greatest legacy is how he changed the Christian imagination about the possible life. Before him, the heroic Christian model was often martyrdom, a single public witness unto death. Anthony presented another model, a daily martyrdom of desire, comfort, and ego. His life suggested that holiness could be pursued with the seriousness of an athlete or soldier. That image resonated across cultures, influencing monks in Egypt, Palestine, Syria, and later the Latin West. Athanasius's biography in particular inspired later conversions by showing a coherent, demanding Christian path. The desert, once seen as empty, became a workshop where souls were forged. If you remember only one thing about Anthony, remember that he sought God without compromise. He did not begin as a scholar, a bishop, or a political leader, but as a young man listening in church. He took one gospel command seriously, and that single decision rippled through centuries of monastic life. His solitude did not make him indifferent because he returned to encourage persecuted Christians and defend the faith. His discipline did not make him harsh, because people came to him seeking mercy and direction. His fame did not make him proud, because he kept fleeing deeper into the desert to remain small. And his death did not end his influence, because his story became a blueprint for countless lives. On January 17th, the Church remembers Saint Anthony the Great as a witness from the Egyptian desert. He stands at the beginning of monastic history as a symbol of prayer, discernment, and spiritual courage. His life shows how one person's interior battle can become a public inheritance for the whole Church. And his memory invites a simple question that is still uncomfortable in every century. What would change in your life if you obeyed the gospel with the same literal seriousness as Anthony did?